In the beginning, there was Eru Iluvatar, an all-powerful god who embarked upon a campaign of creation, forming an area of empty space called the Timeless Void. Within this void, he made the Timeless Halls, serving as a celestial home for the Ainu, the first beings to which he gave life. The Ainu were primordial spirits of independent thought with varying levels of power, each of whom inherited knowledge from a specific portion of the Creator's mind. All save for Melkor, greatest of the Ainu, who shared in the gifts of nearly all the others, making him insatiably curious, yearning to break free from the restrictions imposed by Eru in order to become a creator in his own right, even journeying through the void to search for the flame imperishable, as he knew this was the key to making life forms with spirits of independent thought. Yet this was impossible, as the flame was not something to be found and used, but rather a powerful life force that came directly from Eru Iluvatar. Throughout his search for the flame, Melkor spent so much time alone, his thoughts started to grow apart from the others, becoming more independent, self-interested, and ambitious. This in turn led to feelings of frustration because he could not find the flame, and impatience towards Eru because he left the void empty rather than filling it with new creations, which was his own greatest desire. Melkor's new attitude then resulted in rebellion and the first war in all of history, not fought with weapons, but rather voices, as the clash erupted during the Ainu Lindale, a theme of great music introduced by Eru and sung in blissful harmony by the Ainur. Yet Melkor sought to make the music his own, and so disrupted the harmony with aggressive, loud, repetitive notes, engaging in a war of sound until Eru ended the music and showed them a visual representation of what they created. This vision of Arda depicted scenes of a world unlike anything they imagined, with new creatures and wondrous locations featuring moments of great joy and triumph. Yet the vision also showed images of terrible cruelty and suffering, wickedness infused by the music of Melkor. Fascinated, the Ainur asked for the vision to be made real, and so Eru agreed, on the condition those who entered this universe could not leave until its natural conclusion. Faced with an important decision, some of the Ainur remained in the Timeless Halls, while others descended into the universe Ea and onto the building blocks of a world they called Arda. Understanding it was their task to bring about what they saw in the vision, the 14 most powerful Ainur became shapers and overseers of Arda, primarily seeking to prepare a home for the children of Eru, creatures of independent thought who would one day populate the world. Though other intelligent beings lived upon Arda, the children of Eru were specially formed, with unique gifts and destinies. United in their cause, the 14 most powerful Ainur, called the Valar, were aided in their mission by many of the other spirits who came into the world, the more numerous but less powerful Ainur called Maiar. Then there was Melkor, the most powerful of them all, who was not considered one of the Valar, because upon entering Arda, he sought to make himself king. Refusing to accept his self-appointment, the Valar instead followed Melkor's brother, Manwe, as king of the Valar, a good-natured being of great power, who was dearest to the Creator and best understood his will. Though the Ainur were all spirits born from Eru Iluvatar, specific traits like gender and familial relations differed between them. In this case, Melkor and Manwe were brothers because Eru the Creator considered them brothers from their inception. Similarly, many of the Ainur assumed a physical form upon entering the world, taking the shapes of males or females, depending on what they felt best represented their individual identity. Yet taking a body was not actually necessary, as the Valar and Maiar had access to both the world of the seen, containing physical reality, and the world of the unseen, the realm of spirits accessible to immortal beings. In their spirit form, the Valar and Maiar could not die, but their specific powers were not a limitless resource. The magic of the Ainu, though great, was finite, meaning it could not be replenished after use. Every time they used their powers, their overall strength lessened, and should they use up this energy entirely, they would revert to wandering spirits, so weak they could not interact with the world. Therefore, while Melkor was the most gifted among them, he could not stand against all the Valar who united in their opposition to his rule. Realizing kingship was no longer possible, he grew bitter and angry, seeking instead to destroy all of creation. Fighting a series of devastating wars, the Dark Lord Melkor caused so much damage, the Lens of Arda changed form a number of times. Though most of the Maiar served the Valar and fought at their side, some joined the Dark Lord, while others still remained neutral, preferring to explore the world in their own fashion and pursue their own goals. A powerful figure who was gathering followers even in the Timeless Halls. Some Maiar were drawn to Melkor and served him faithfully, possibly because they were corrupted or had their own dark ambitions, while others still may have been loyal because they were part of his rebellion during the War of Sound. Often used as messengers and agents of the Valar or Melkor, some of the Maiar were well known in later ages, gaining great reputations for their powers and deeds. Some of these famous Maiar who served the Valar included Gandalf the Grey, Saruman the White, and the other wizards of their order, while among those who served Melkor was his chief lieutenant Sauron, as well as the great fire spirits called Balrogs under Gothmog, a lieutenant more dedicated to combat. During a time of respite between the wars of Melkor, the Valar brought light into the world through 2 great lamps, but they too were destroyed by the Dark Lord in another conflict which caused the lands and seas of Arda to change form, originally creating a great symmetrical landmass surrounded by sea upon a flat world. The damage inflicted by Melkor eventually left 3 great continents and several oceans. Choosing the western continent of Aman as their homeland, the Valar and Maiar founded the realm of Valinor as an enchanted paradise. These undying lands flowed with magic and served as a home to the immortal races, but it was not the land itself that was special, but rather the land was made special by the presence of the Valar and Maiar. Requiring a new light source, the Valar created the 2 trees, Laurelin and Telperion, beginning the years of the trees, while Melkor claimed the central continent of Middle-earth, ruling from a mighty northern fortress. The eastern land of the sun was uninhabited. Learning of the Dark Lord's presence in Middle-earth, the Valar grew concerned for the Elves, the first of the children of Eru, who awoke in Cuiviénen. Though the light of the trees could not reach so far east, they were spared total darkness by the stars in the sky created by Varda. The queen of the Valar went to Manwë. Seeking to dominate all of Middle-earth, Melkor started capturing wayward elves to torture and twist into the orc race, monstrous creatures ready to obey the Dark Lord's every command. Unable to create his own life forms, as he could not grant the flame imperishable, he found another way by using his dark powers to corrupt creatures which already existed, including intelligent species like the elves, turning them into a horrifying mockery of their former selves. Wanting to protect the elder children of Eru, the Valar and Maiar invaded Middle-earth and defeated Melkor in the war for sake of the elves, capturing him with a special chain before returning west. Yet after fighting another devastating war which changed the world, the Valar were so eager to be done with the conflict, they failed to eliminate the remaining servants of the Dark Lord who escaped the fighting or remained hidden in the lower levels of his fortresses. With Melkor gone, the Valar invited the tall, elegant, beautiful elves, distinguished by their pointed ears, to live with them in Valinor, as Eru meant for this world to be their eternal home, and for that reason granted them the gift of immortality, meaning they could withstand the magical energy flowing through the Undying Lands. The elves, like the Valar and Maiar, could see the world of the unseen, and had spirits that could not die, though their physical bodies could be destroyed. Though many were eager to journey west, not all were willing to go, and so the elves were sundered, with those who accepted the great journey west becoming the Eldar, while those who remained behind were called the Avari. The Eldar elves were then split into 3 more factions, with the Vanyar and Noldor making it to Valinor without issue, while some of the Teleri abandoned the journey for varying reasons, settling the lands they passed. While some of these Teleri chose the lands east of the Misty Mountains, others established realms in the northwestern region of Beleriand, like their leader Elwë, who married Melian, a great Maya from Valinor with an independent spirit who enjoyed journeying through Middle-earth on her own, allowing them to meet, fall in love, and found the realm of Doriath, where they ruled as king and queen. Elwë then became known as High King Eleuthingol, holding authority over all the Sindar of Beleriand. Sindar was the name given to those Teleri who left the great journey to settle this region, and included the havens of the Falas, a western realm established along the coast, ruled by Lord Círdan, a wise old elf who was specially instructed by the Valar to remain in Middle-earth, so he might build ships to transport future elves who might eventually wish to travel west to Valinor. As for those who completed the great journey, the Teleri became great shipbuilders, while the Vanyar dedicated themselves to serving the Valar, and the Noldor became great craftsmen and smiths, all the while Melkor seethed in captivity, hating the elves and plotting his revenge. Imprisoned for 3 ages, Melkor at last enacted his plan, feigning repentance to seek pardon from his good-natured brother Manwë, king of the Valar, who released him over the objections of others. At first, Melkor was helpful and kind, but everyone learned the truth when he launched a devastating attack that destroyed the 2 Trees of Light, plunging the continent into darkness. He then moved north to the fortress of Formenos, where Melkor killed Finwë, ruler of the Noldor Elves, stole the 3 precious Silmaril jewels of the High King's eldest son Feanor, and fled east to Middle-earth. In order to accomplish so much, Melkor allied with the Ungoliant, a mysterious, primordial being of unknown origin, whose greatest desire was to feed her endless hunger from sources of power and light like the 2 Trees of Valinor. The Ungoliant was so powerful that once they reached Middle-earth, she fought and defeated Melkor to take possession of the Silmaril jewels, which were the greatest gems ever crafted, containing light from the 2 trees. Yet Melkor was saved, and he remained in possession of the Silmarils, thanks to his loyal Balrogs who were awaiting his return in a nearby fortress, and heard his cries of pain. The Ungoliant then fled south, where she became mother to the race of great spiders, like the famous Shelob, which Sauron considered his cat, and who played an important role in the War of the Ring at the end of the Third Age. Back in Valinor, the new High King was Feanor, eldest son of Finwë and creator of the Silmarils, said to be the most gifted elf to ever live, with a spirit so powerful it drained his mother's life force to the point where she lost all joy and voluntarily ended her physical existence in order to live as a spirit in the halls of Mandos, a place where all spirits went to rest and be judged after the deaths of their mortal bodies. Outraged by the crimes against his family, the new High King Feanor gave a rousing speech and swore a powerful oath along with his 7 sons, vowing to recover the Silmarils by any means and at any cost. This meant sailing east to fight the War of Great Jewels against Melkor, renamed Morgoth meaning Black Enemy. Superseding the history of hostility between the sons of Finwë, the younger brothers Fingolfin and Finarfin temporarily unified under the new High King, but soon enough fractured once more when Feanor and his most loyal followers committed the first kinslaying, slaughtering the Teleri elves of the coast when they refused to allow the use of their ships for the voyage east across the sea. This divide between the High King's most dedicated followers and those of his brothers would, for a time, improve, but never fully mend, as the Feanor faction's unending pursuit of the Silmarils eventually led them to commit 2 more kinslayings. In response to their departure and the first kinslaying, the great Vala Mandos the Doomsman, who ruled over the spirits of the dead in the halls of Mandos, foresaw tragedy and devastation for all Noldor that left the Undying Lands. Upon hearing the doom of Mandos, Feanor's youngest brother Finarfin led roughly 1/10 of their people back to Valinor, while the High King departed with his supporters across the sea, abandoning Fingolfin's faction, as he was angered by their criticisms of the kinslaying and felt they could not be sufficiently relied upon in the coming war. Yet the remaining Noldor under Fingolfin were determined to reach Middle-earth, as many of them had their own reasons for leaving, and held their own hatred for Morgoth, regardless of their disagreements with the High King. Therefore, Fingolfin led his people north through the dangerous icy wastes of Helcaraxe, where many were lost in the crossing. Meanwhile, Melkor ruled from his fortress of Angband, gathering together all former servants, including his chief lieutenants, the Maiar Sauron and Gothmog, to spread corruption across the continent. In the east, the younger children of Eru started coming into the world, beginning with the 7 dwarf clans waking during the years of the trees to claim the Blue, Misty, and Red Mountains. The adopted children of Eru, the dwarves, had a unique origin, as they were given life not by the creator, but rather the Vala Aule, the smith, a great craftsman who, like Melkor, had a passion for creation and sought to form intelligent beings of his own design. Yet, unlike Melkor, once Aule realized his dwarves would never have independent thought without the flame imperishable, he apologized to Eru, who forgave him and adopted the dwarves as his own, giving them the secret fire and placing them to sleep so they might one day awaken into the world. Though they were not given the gift of immortality, with most living 200 to 300 years, they had a unique fate awaiting them after death, as their spirits would return to the service of their original creator, Aule. A short, squat, resourceful people, often distinguished by their enormous beards, dwarves had a passion for craftwork and mining, making the mountains their homes, where they largely kept to their own affairs. Though the elves and dwarves populated many lands, it would be the youngest children of Eru who spread furthest throughout Middle-earth. Waking in the lands of Hildorien, they rose with the sun and moon, created by the Valar to replace the 2 trees and illuminate the entire world, thereby beginning the first stage of Middle-earth. Yet as human settlements spread, they came under the influence of the Dark Lord, causing some to depart from the lands of the east, journeying west until reaching Beleriand, where they were known as the Edain. Over the next 5 centuries, the Noldor Elves fought the War of Great Jewels alongside their allies, including the Dwarves of the Blue Mountains, Edain humans, and some of the Sindar Elves, losing many great heroes like High King Feanor, who died fighting a horde of Balrogs, and his successor Fingolfin, who died in single combat with Morgoth. Yet the allies also won a number of early victories, allowing the elves to live in relative peace for centuries. But the Dark Lord was cunning and patient, raising great armies filled not only with his Maiar servants and the lowly orcs, but also other corrupted creatures, like the trolls who were once Ents, peaceful, intelligent tree-like beings that watched over the forests of Middle-earth. He also made dragons and other wicked creatures, allowing him to eventually conquer nearly all of Beleriand. In the end, total defeat was only avoided when the half-elven hero Earendil and his mixed-blood wife journeyed west to the Undying Lands with a Silmaril jewel stolen from the crown of Morgoth. Begging for their assistance, the Valar decided to intervene and launched the War of Wrath, a bloody 40-year struggle in which they defeated and captured Morgoth, with his feet hewn from under him before the Valar executed his body and banished his spirit from Arda, setting guards to enforce his exile. Yet prophecy stated Morgoth would one day return and wage a final battle to end the world. The dawn of the Second Age meant the War of Great Jewels was over, with the final two Silmarils ending up in the hands of Maedhros and Maglor, the last living sons of Feanor. Yet they'd done so much evil to fulfill their oath, the jewels deemed them unworthy and burned their hands. Unable to live with all he'd done, Maedhros threw himself and his jewel into a fiery chasm, while Maglor tossed his Silmaril into the ocean, living out his days singing and wandering aimlessly throughout Middle-earth. For centuries, the Valar did their best to avoid interfering in the affairs of the East, and were once again reminded why, as their fighting caused the collapse of Beleriand into the sea. Therefore, they resolved to return home and never again interfere with the peoples of Middle-earth, issuing a pardon to the Noldor while extending an invitation to any other elves who wished to make the voyage west. Many were grateful and left for the Undying Lands, while others remained behind to found new realms in Middle-earth. Although the elves were given the option to enjoy an enchanted paradise, the other races, including the other children of Eru, were forbidden from traveling west through the ban of the Valar, as their mortal forms could not withstand the magic flowing through their lands, and it would end up shortening their lives considerably. Yet this division led to a more philosophical argument between the original children of Eru, which delved into their specific gifts, as the elves were granted immortality but were tied to the world, meaning that when this creation ended, so too would their current form of existence. Men, however, were granted the gift of mortality, meaning they were not tied to this world, and after death would go on to a second unknown destiny prepared by the Creator. For many years, these diverging fates caused no major issues between the races, but in time, some men would object, believing their gift to be a curse, envious of the immortal elves living in paradise. As for the human houses of the Edain, who fought for the Valar, they became the Dunedain, rewarded with increased wisdom, longer lifespans, enhanced abilities, and a new island home raised in the middle of the Sea of Belegaer. Establishing the kingdom of Númenor, Elros, a son of Earendil, ruled as their first king, blessed with even greater abilities and longer life than his people, as he and his brother Elrond were descended from a powerful bloodline which included elven kings, chieftains of men, and even a Maya queen. The Valar, therefore, granted them the right to choose their own fate among the children of Eru, causing Elrond to take the life of an immortal elf, while Elros chose to be a man, granted the gift of mortality. Yet while Elros was destined to die, his extraordinary bloodline allowed him to live 5 centuries, establishing the foundations of a mighty human kingdom that rose to become the most powerful realm in the world east of Valinor. Among the many heroes descended from the lineage of Elrond and Elros were important, famous figures of history like Ar-Pharazôn, High King Elendil, High King Isildur, Arwen the Evenstar, and the Ranger Aragorn, who became High King Elessar. Back in Middle-earth, survivors recovered as best they could, with the dwarves of the Blue Mountains joining Durin's folk in Khazad-dûm, while the non-Edain humans of the West, known as Middlemen, for the most part retained good relations with their neighbors, though some spoke a different language than the rest, and over time were no longer considered kin, becoming known as Dunlendings. As for the elves, they largely abandoned their old divisions and lived together in the newly formed kingdom of Lindon under High King Gil-galad, one of the last surviving descendants of High King Finwë. Among those in Lindon was Lord Círdan, who ruled over the port city of the Greyhaven, still on his mission to make ships for his people. Then there were those elves with more adventurous spirits, who journeyed into the lands of the East, coming into contact with their ancient kinsmen, descended from those Teleri who abandoned the great journey to Valinor early on, and now populated the forests east of the Misty Mountains. These Teleri, now called Silvan, welcomed the more advanced Western elves with open arms, even accepting the Sindar noble Amdir as king of Lothlorien, and the former lord of Doriath Orofer as king of the Woodland Realm. Around 750 SA, Celebrimbor, the grandson of Feanor, founded the realm of Eregion near the Misty Mountains, where they specialized in smithwork. Though Morgoth was defeated and could no longer directly influence the world, some of his orcs, trolls, dragons, Balrogs, and other servants fled east, as did his lieutenant Sauron, who became the new Dark Lord of Middle-earth. Whereas the First Age saw the great elven kingdoms rise to prominence, the Second Age saw the rise of men who established great realms across the world, while the elves slowly lessened in number and importance, with many leaving Middle-earth for the paradise of Valinor. Taking a wider view of the world, the next 3,500 years saw much war and strife, largely as a result of the Second Dark Lord, Sauron, and the other former servants of Morgoth. In the west, the Valar, Maiar, and many elves continued to live in peace, watching over the rest of the world, but interfering as little as possible, although Manwë, king of the Valar, did grant his Great Eagle scouts permission to occasionally lend aid to the children of Eru. Reporting on events outside Aman, some believe the Great Eagles were Maiar's spirits, while others say they were animals whose intelligence was elevated by the Valar, and may even have been conceived by Manwë when he sang in the Timeless Halls. Moving east, the kingdom of Numenor, populated by the Dúnedain, prospered throughout much of the Second Age, becoming the greatest realm outside Valinor and creating a vast maritime empire as their sailors explored and settled the many lands of this world. Though little is known of the continents south and east of Middle-earth, it was possible Numenor formed colonies on these lands which were lost to history. Within Middle-earth, most of the more advanced Noldor Elves remained in the northwest of the continent, while the descendants of the Avari continued to populate the east, progressing in their own way, but remaining far less developed than those who journeyed west and took part in the wars against Morgoth. Then there were the dwarves who remained in their mountains, largely isolated from the rest of the world, while non-Dúnedain humans spread all throughout Middle-earth, unable to match the grandeur of Numenor, but nonetheless establishing their own realms and civilizations. Trading and interacting with the Noldor Elves and the Dúnedain, the middlemen made their home in the northwest, as did the rival wildmen of Dunland. Further east, near and beyond the Sea of Rhûn, lived various sallow and olive-skinned peoples, known collectively as the Easterlings, while in the south, the dark-skinned Haradrim tribes developed into expert horsemen and beastmasters, eventually training great elephants for war. After the defeat of Melkor in the First Age, Sauron started to question everything he believed, and even offered his surrender to the Valar, yet his thoughts always returned to the power and influence he held under Morgoth, and ultimately refused to face judgment, instead following in the footsteps of his master by escaping to the east, where he procured a base of support among the Easterlings, and later Haradrim, using threats, gifts, coercion, or whatever was necessary to secure their allegiances. As a result, both Morgoth and Sauron were considered gods or great kings throughout much of Middle-earth, with Sauron even responsible for creating the cult of Melkor, which eventually infiltrated Numenor. Although Sauron gained influence over the east and south, he needed a more cunning plan to defeat the powerful elves and their allies in the northwest, and so tricked the elves of Eregion into forging 19 rings of power, while he secretly created a master ring imbued with part of his spirit, allowing the One Ring to have influence over all the others, one ring to rule them all. Although each of the rings of power held magical properties, the One Ring was beyond them all, as it allowed Sauron to exert power without depleting his life force, as his strength was preserved within the ring. However, this benefit also came with danger, for if another being with sufficient will and ability took the ring for themselves, they too would increase in might to such an extent they could rival the Dark Lord. Yet the worst consequence came if the ring was destroyed, as Sauron's physical form would be lost, and his spirit diminished to the point where he could no longer interact with the world. Should the ring be in the possession of someone other than Sauron, its powers were still greater than all the others, as it allowed the bearer to augment their natural abilities, increase their lifespan, turn invisible, see the spirit realm, influence those around them, control the wills of others, halt decay, and generate prosperity in the surrounding area. Yet it also had negative effects, corrupting the mind of its wearer, and tempting them with visions of their greatest desires, to create such an obsessive attachment to the ring they could never hope to destroy it of their own volition. However, the ring itself could choose to abandon the wearer, making itself larger to slip off their fingers and await a new owner. The One Ring was also impervious to all forms of damage, and could therefore only be destroyed in the fires of Mount Doom where it was created. Fortunately for the elves, they were powerful enough to recognize the corruption of the rings, and went to war with Sauron, who eventually recovered all but the 3 most powerful, which were given to great elven lords for safekeeping. With the destruction of Eregion in the War of the Elves and Sauron, Celebrimbor was killed, and so Lord Elrond, who arrived from Lindon with reinforcements, led survivors to found the city of Rivendell further north. Sauron then granted 7 rings to the 7 dwarf kings, while giving 9 to great kings and sorcerers of men. Although the dwarves resisted his influence, the 9 men became powerful, obedient servants of the Dark Lord, and while their bodies decayed over time, their spirits lived on, tied to Sauron and the One Ring, becoming undead ringwraiths, or Nazgul, led by the Witch King of Angmar. Making his home in the lands of Mordor, Sauron gathered massive armies of orcs and eventually conquered much of Middle-earth, but suffered a significant setback when the armies of Numenor arrived, defeating and humiliating him before taking him captive to their homeland. Yet while Sauron was in fact militarily defeated, he endured this humiliation gladly, as he formulated a new plan to infiltrate and corrupt Numenor from within. Succeeding in his efforts, he eventually convinced their king Pharazôn to invade the Undying Lands of the West. In the year 3319 SA, Ar-Pharazôn's armies arrived in the Undying Lands, causing the creator Eru to unleash his terrible power, swallowing the ships of the king's great armada beneath the waves, while their warriors were buried under falling hills, trapped within the Forgotten Caves until the final battle at the end of the world. The island of Numenor, meanwhile, sank into the sea, while the continent of Aman physically detached itself from the previously flat world, now made round, populated with new lands and seas. As a result of these changes, travel to the Undying Lands was impossible for all save the elves, who were granted access through a hidden straight road. This great cataclysm led to the deaths of nearly everyone on Numenor, though some few who remained faithful to the Valar were spared and fled east, founding the kingdoms of Arnor and Gondor near their elven allies in Middle-earth. Although Sauron's body was killed, his spirit retained power through the One Ring, and so he returned to Mordor and started raising new armies for conquest. The final confrontation of the Age occurred during the War of the Last Alliance, when the elves under King Gil-galad allied with the humans under High King Elendil, formerly of Numenor, as well as the dwarves of the Misty Mountains, to defeat Sauron and scatter his armies. Yet while Sauron was again physically destroyed, and his spirit diminished because he lost access to the One Ring, he still held power and influence so long as the One Ring survived. As Elendil was killed while fighting the Dark Lord, his son and heir Isildur took possession of the One Ring, and was quickly corrupted, refusing to destroy it, though he was soon killed and the ring lost for over 2,000 years in the River Anduin. The survival of the ring allowed Sauron's spirit to once again flee into the east and start its campaign of conquest over from the beginning. Thus began the Third Age, with elves further receding from a place of prominence in Middle-earth, while humans continued to grow in number. Though the last High King Gil-galad died in the War of the Last Alliance, other wise, powerful elves took over leadership of their people, with Círdan remaining Lord of the Grey Havens, while Elrond ruled over Rivendell, King Thranduil in the Woodland Realm, and eventually Lady Galadriel and Lord Celeborn in Lothlorien. The Avari, meanwhile, remained in the east, but slowly spread further west, with some eventually meeting and mixing with the Sylvan Elves. Though dwarves largely continued their pattern of minding their own affairs, the Third Age saw a number of wars and tragedies strike the Seven Dwarven Kingdoms, as they fought dragons which coveted their wealth, and waged a terrible war trying to wipe out the orcs of the Misty Mountains. Though the dwarves resisted the influence of Sauron, it was believed the Rings of Power nonetheless contributed to the devastation they faced, as it made them greedy and reckless in their pursuit of wealth. As for humanity, many Easterlings and Haradrim continued to serve Sauron, as did other peoples like the Variags of Khand and Corsairs of Umbar, participating in wars primarily with Gondor, developing great animosity between them. However, support for Sauron might have been lessened by the Order of Wizards, 5 Maiar spirits sent from the Undying Lands to help defeat the Dark Lord in the Third Age. Although Gandalf the Grey and Radagast the Brown largely focused on the northwest of the continent, Saruman the White and the 2 Blue Wizards traveled east and south, doing what they could to combat the Dark Lord's influence. Knowing that Sauron was once a faithful Maia like the wizards, the Valar understood the temptations awaiting them, as they would be surrounded by beings incapable of magic, and so could easily use their powers to make themselves kings. Elevating this threat further was the possibility that a wizard might take the One Ring and succumb to its corruption, becoming yet another Dark Lord seeking the conquest of Middle-earth. In order to minimize this threat, the Valar forbid the wizards from overt use of their powers, or facing the Dark Lord directly, and had them take the form of elderly men so they could offer counsel to the elves, humans, and dwarves while appearing as equals. The most prosperous human realms of the Third Age, Gondor and Arnor, were populated by the descendants of Numenor, and became close allies to the Northmen, descended from the Middlemen, who eventually founded the Kingdom of Rohan, where they became great horse lords. In the later years of the Third Age, the diminutive Hobbit race appeared, an offshoot of men who made their home along the Anduin River, near the Greenwood Forest, but eventually migrated west to found the peaceful realm of the Shire, where they lived in isolation as farmers. For much of this age, Sauron waited, recovering his strength and growing his support across the continent, while also striking out at enemies through agents like the Nazgul, resulting in the defeat of Arnor and weakening of Gondor. Though Sauron acted in secret, Gandalf suspected his growing influence, and so in 2941 TA, aided the Dwarven King Thorin Oakenshield in reclaiming the mountain of Erebor, which the dragon Smaug made his home. This was the setting for the Hobbit novel, as Gandalf sought to eliminate the dragon, thereby preventing Sauron from making him an ally. Eventually, the Dark Lord returned to Mordor, where he raised armies of orcs, trolls, wicked creatures, and human allies, culminating in the War of the Ring, when the One Ring of Power was discovered in the possession of a hobbit named Frodo Baggins, the nephew of Bilbo. This then became the setting of the Lord of the Rings novels, taking place 60 years after the events of The Hobbit. Fortunately for the free peoples of Middle-earth, they defeated the Dark Lord, thanks once again to the efforts of the wizard Gandalf the Grey, who organized and united the realms of elves, dwarves, and humans in the northwest, and won the war by distracting enemy armies long enough for Frodo to destroy the One Ring in the fires of Mount Doom. With the ring destroyed, Sauron's spirit diminished to such an extent he could no longer interact with the world. The same occurred to Saruman the White, who betrayed the other wizards and sought the One Ring for himself while also aiding the Dark Lord. As for Gandalf, he returned to Valinor, as did many more elves, with their kingdoms gradually disappearing throughout the Fourth Age that followed. Dwarves, meanwhile, again remained in their mountains and were rarely seen, while humans thrived for many years, especially those under the reign of the reunited kingdom of Gondor and Arnor, ruled by King Elessar after the war, and then his son Eldarion. Little is known about what went on in the later years of the Fourth Age and beyond, yet prophecies claim the final days of this world would come during Dagor Dagorath, a final battle in which Morgoth would return to invade Arda. But he would be defeated, thus bringing an end to the world, and the vision of Arda sang long ago in the Timeless Halls. What would happen after that, none could be certain, but one theory stated that the dwarves would help Eru and the Valar build a new world, populated by humans, who were finally granted the unknown destiny promised through the gift of mortality. A special thanks to all those who contribute to CivilizationEx, like Sir Gil of Tarth, James the Cheap, Tim, Kristen Greeneyes of the Company of the Cat, and John Amber of Whitefork. If you'd like to help contribute to the channel, be sure to like, subscribe, leave a comment, and click on the links below, or else go to patreon.com/CivilizationEx, where you can gain early access to videos, vote on future content, and watch the Patreon-only series, Heroes of Lore and Legend.